fishing from shore, hunting for small animals and crustaceans and the like, as well as water and coconut collection, became everyday activities for me over the following weeks. My face became bearded, and my skin dry and cracked and burned from the sun. I was reluctantly adapting to my situation and doing all I could to try to remain alive, positive and hopeful for rescue. It was now just over a month since my stranding on the island, and my new shelter in the cave, while being much more comfortable than the makeshift hammock with a lean-to cover, was beginning to feel more and more like a prison. I had not yet explored the full extent of the cave, but it was much deeper than I knew or was willing to explore. My 33rd night on the island brought a renewed fear for me. It was the night the beating of the drums and the chanting began. While faint and seemingly distant, the knowledge that I was alone on the island and many kilometers from the nearest landmass made it impossible that I should be hearing these sounds. I needed to know what, where, who, and why I was hearing these sounds. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Was the solitude driving me crazy? Or was it something else? As I exited the cave the next morning, I had a feeling I was being watched, that I was not alone, and that feeling only intensified when I got to the fire pit down by the beach. There were footprints in the sand around the pit. It appeared to be more than one set of prints, and they all seemed to be moving around the fire pit in the same direction. I started looking around and shouting hello, hoping for a reply, but there was nothing but the sounds of the crashing waves, the wind through the trees, and birds chirping around me. If this was the source of the drums and chanting I heard the night before, it would have sounded much closer because the fire pit was no more than 15 or 20 meters away from the cave where I slept. The feeling of being watched returned, and as I looked around, my attention was drawn to the hills to the north of my position, and to what seemed like a structure there, almost completely hidden by the trees. I made up my mind that would be my focus of attention for the day. After eating some coconut and fish, my new breakfast, I set out in the direction of what I saw in the hills. Although I lost sight of it while ascending through the dense bush and trees, I kept my bearings and eventually made it to a clearing where I found the structure I saw from camp. It was not just one structure, but more like a small tribal village. While it seemed abandoned, a chill ran down my spine when I saw the skulls, bones, and other artifacts around what looked like an altar cut from a boulder. I remembered the travel articles I read before my trip to Vanuatu, and I knew that they had cannibalistic tribes as recently as 1969 when it was claimed they had their last cannibal sacrifice. I remembered reading about their rituals, human sacrifices, and killing of missionaries by the Namba tribes. These tribes were heavy into witchcraft and sorcery, and were not a people to trifle with. As I walked through the ruins, I saw something that caught my eyes, inscribed onto the walls of what seemed to be a carve-out at the base of a cliff near the biggest hut in the village. There were drawings of what seemed to picture the islands and the surrounding seas. However, the scary part was what I noticed in the waters of the drawings. It was an enormous shark with a huge dorsal fin, and the people were bowed before it in worship. Was this the shark swimming just offshore from my camp below? Did I arrive here by accident or by design? Was I tricked onto this island, or was it something more malevolent that brought me here, as was keeping me here? Why haven't I seen any other kayakers since I was marooned here? No boaters, no fishermen, no signs of tourists. It was as if I had disappeared into another dimension, or as if the outside world had disappeared. All of a sudden, the feeling of being watched returned, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Goosebumps covered my body, and the next thing I knew, I was running back down the hill through the jungle towards camp. The sensation of being followed became overwhelming, and my speed increased. I was jumping over fallen trees, rocks, little streams, and whatever other obstacles I encountered, with no regard for my physical safety. I just needed to get out of there and back to camp. As I ran, the sound of the drums chanting returned, and it was now louder than the night before. My speed increased even more, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My breathing was erratic and deep as I ran with all I had to what I hoped would be eventual safety. Finally, I reached the edge of the jungle and could hear the crashing waves just beyond. I burst out of the final bit of bush onto the beach, running down to the shore towards the water. There again in front of me was my nemesis, that beast of a shark. My captor and prison guard was still there. I had no chance of escape unless my escape was into its jaws. I felt this overwhelming hate and rage fill me, and I screamed out at the beast. I wanted to kill it. I wanted to see it die. As I regained some form of sanity, I realized I was now waist deep in the ocean, slapping the surface of the water and cussing at the shark. I turned to run for the shore and was hit by an enormous wave that tossed and tumbled me all the way back to the sandy beach. I crawled up the beach and out of the water. Mental agony was now engulfing me and taking me to the threshold of my wits. I was a broken man just waiting to die. The island and my circumstances were winning the battle for my sanity. As I lay on the sand and turned on my back, I realized the sky had darkened. It could not be sunset already. I was only gone for a maximum of 3 hours. The clouds rolled through the sky above me, like dense smoke out of a chimney, churning in the wind as they rolled by. The sky was comprised of sunset colors, reds, yellows, orange, pink, and grays. What was going on? What was happening? Did I pass out? Was I dreaming? Did something really happen to me up there? Did time pass without me knowing it? I looked down at my watch to see what time it was, and what I saw shocked me. On my forearm was a large bruise in the shape of a handprint. What the hell? Where did that come from? It was too big to be my handprint. Then I noticed the time. It was almost 6:30 p.m. What happened to the previous 9 hours? It only took me about an hour to reach the ruins at the top of the hill, and I was sure I was there for an hour and a half or 2 hours at the most. Boom! Boom! A clap of thunder ripped through the silence with the intensity of a mammoth explosion. A flash of lightning tore across the sky, shattering the clouds like broken glass, followed by an even louder clap of thunder. It was like nothing I'd ever seen or heard before. It seemed like a vision of hell from nightmares. Then the rain began and tore me from my trance-like state. My thoughts turned to the fire and wood for fire. A night in this place in complete darkness would be more than I could handle in my present state of depleted morale. I ran to the fire pit and grabbed one of the still glowing embers. It took me a couple of seconds to feel the pain and acknowledge the shock that the fire had not fully burned out, but I didn't care. I needed to get it back to the cave and stock up as much wood as possible before everything would be too wet to burn. Something beyond my understanding or ability to explain was happening around me or to me. I still wasn't sure. I ran to the wood pile I had collected to move as much of the wood, hopefully all of it, out of the rain and into the cave. The sun was inexplicably going down. I had unknowingly lost hours of time. I seemed to be blanking out and losing my mind. I needed some form of security, even if it was just the warm glow and light from the fire. By the time I got the fire started and moved the wood into the cave, the night had once again fallen and darkness enveloped my world with the exception of the fire. That night, it stormed like I had never seen before. The lightning, thunder, rain, and wind were relentless. I was unable to sleep for even a brief period and spent all that night next to the fire making sure it stayed lit, while pondering and looking for enlightenments to the day's experiences. No rational insights found their way into my mind. I could find no normal explanations. Only thoughts of the paranormal found a home within me. Could it be something to do with the witchcraft, sorcery, or human sacrifices that happened on these islands? If they spoke with the dead, could the dead be trying to communicate with me? Why? What happened to my arm? Where did the handprint on my arm come from? I felt as if I was going crazy. By sunrise the next morning, I was paranoid. I was a mess, and was more determined than ever to get off that island. I didn't care how, nor what I had to do to accomplish my goal. Dead or alive, shark food or not, I wanted out. I wanted off. That day, as the storm continued unleashing its fury outside the island, I developed a plan to create a huge fire on the highest point of the island. I was going to burn the entire forest on the highest peak, including the ruins if necessary. I was going to make sure that I had a plume of smoke that would be visible for many kilometers in every direction, and by night would illuminate the sky for kilometers in every direction. It would take some time for the land and the forest to dry off after this rain, but I would use that time to gather all I would need in the right areas to ensure the best possible burn with the highest possible smoke factor I could create. I also planned to move my campsite to another cave I spotted in one of my daily hikes. It was cut into the side of a cliff right on the ocean. Due to its elevation, it was a great vantage point for the ocean visibility, while just below it had a ledge jutting out over the water, which made an excellent point for fishing. It was also much closer to my freshwater source, which would reduce my time away from camp, thereby providing me more time for keeping a lookout for potential rescue vessels. I had a plan, but could I put it into action? As the day turned to night once again, without reprieve from the onslaught of the storm, the strange sounds began. To maintain some form of sanity, I settled my mind by continuing to fabricate the details of my plan in my head, where I would place the piles of materials to begin the fire, what I would use, how much I would need for each location, what I would do if it rained like this again, and where I would begin the fire so I would not be trapped by fire or smoke once it got going. Exhaustion finally caught up with me, and I was finally able to sleep. The next morning when I woke, I was amazed at two things: how clear the sky was, and how far up the beach the waves reached during the night. I must have been more tired than I realized, because debris was just over a meter away from the cave entrance, and the water from the waves was even closer. Just a little bit further, and I would have been trapped in there until low tide. I might have even had the beast for company. The noise from that should have been enough to wake me, but thankfully it didn't. I needed that sleep. As with everything in life, there was a silver lining to the storm. I would not need to climb for coconuts for a while, and the storm surge left behind a few pools with some fish, crabs, and a couple lobsters. Fishing would not be necessary either. I took this opportunity to go to the cave where I planned to make my new island home. I wanted to see how effective it would be, and I needed a supply of water anyhow. I gathered up some coconuts, the water bottles, strapped my knife to my leg, and was on my way. Looking out over the water as I walked, I could see that the storm did not take nor deter my nemesis from his guard duty. As I approached the new cave, I could see that I would be safer there than I would be in the present cave if the storm was more severe. I also noticed that there was something new on the reef, a few meters out. As I got closer, I realized it was the fuselage of a plane, or at least what remained of it. I deposited the coconuts and the water bottles in the cave and made my way back down to the water's edge. The fuselage seemed to be mostly intact, with just the tail section and a wing missing. It did not have any markings on it representing either civilian or military affiliation. It also looked as if it was a recent crash, and not the remains of anything that the storm brought up from the depths, which had been there for any length of time. I wondered if it was brought down by the storm. The condition of the remains made it seem possible. Could any survivors be trapped in there? My thoughts then shifted to the possibility that I might be able to salvage a lot of useful items from the crash. Weighing out the pros and the cons of the risky trek into the water, I decided I would take the chance. The water didn't seem to be deep in that area, as I could see the rocks of the reef just below the surface of the water. I looked for my stalker to see where he was. Verifying that he was not in the area and had not followed me down this side, I went for it, slowly and cautiously making my way across the reef and out to the remains of the downed craft. Upon reaching the fuselage, I realized it was on its side, at the edge of the reef, with the wing propping it up by resting on the sand after the reef, and the front of the craft hanging over the edge of the reef. There was about half a meter of water on the inside, towards the front, and I could see that the right side of the cockpit was facing down and under the water. There weren't many seats on the inside, and this indicated to me that it might be a cargo plane. I did a quick search and determined that while there were a few items I could use, there really wasn't much else. I made my way to the cockpit, expecting a gruesome find there. As I was about to open the door, I felt a vibration and slight movement of the aircraft. I figured it might have been a wave and hoped it would not slip off the reef, dropping me in the domain of the beast. However, if it did, I wasn't far from the reef, and a quick exit out the tailless section would be possible. I opened the cockpit door, and as expected, there was the remains of 2 pilots. The bodies were fresh, and I could tell they died from head injuries occurred from the sudden impact of the crash. I knew I would have to take them out for burial. I searched around the cockpit for the emergency kit and found 3 of them and 2 backpacks. I also found a VHF walkie-talkie, a flare gun, a knife, an inflatable raft, some water bottles, a few cans of Pepsi, some food, as well as some cigarettes and a lighter. I packed as much of the supplies into the backpacks as would fit. The only thing I could not manage to carry was the raft. I planned to come back for it and the bodies for burial, and to make a final search for anything else of use. I put on the backpacks, one on my back and the other I carried in my hands. As I turned to leave, I felt a solid thud against the body of the aircraft and felt it begin to shift. The front dipped down further under the waves, and more water began to enter through the broken window. Then I saw the shadow. It was him. It was that beast of a shark. I saw it as it swam by the window and gasped in amazement at its size. He swam right up to the submerged window, and we made eye contact. Seeing it so close up and clearly, while driving fear into my heart, also gave me a sense of appreciation and respect for its mammoth girth and length. I did not know sharks could grow so big. It nudged the window of the plane, and I could hear it cracking to give way. The beast then turned and swam towards the back of the craft. I could still see its tail and back when I felt a violent impact towards the back of the fuselage. I did not stay around to offer any further appreciation for the animal. I moved as quickly as I could, grabbing the container with the life raft as I ran to the tail section. I jumped from the void at the rear and landed on the reef. I had about 30 meters to go, on foot, in about half a meter of water before I could reach the edge of the reef towards the shore and safety. Just then I heard the shark crash against the fuselage again, and I turned around in time to see its massive jaws biting into the body of the aircraft, its eyes rolling up and closing as it did so, and it dragged the fuselage down off the reef into the deeper water. I took the opportunity to run as fast as I could for shore. I knew there was a short area of sand after the reef where there was a drop-off, and the water was about 1.5 meters deep before it reached the beach. I needed to get there before the shark had time to make his way around the reef to that part, and I was determined to do so. I hoped he would stay occupied with what he had in his mouth, but did not look back to find out. I just ran for it. I reached the drop-off, and as I did, I lost my balance and fell. As I got back to my feet, I was facing to my left and grabbing for the raft when I saw the fin coming around the edge of the reef, about 50 meters away from me. I struggled against the water to move the final 5 meters to the shore. I could not help but keep looking to my left for the creature as I moved through the water and eventually reached the shore. I threw what I was carrying further up the beach, took off the backpack, and dropped to the sand in relief. As I lay there, breathing heavily, I heard a crashing of water, and when I looked, the beast was beaching himself trying to get me. It was so close to me that I could hear the snapping of his mighty jaws and could almost smell his rotten breath. I stood there, staring in amazement, and for a brief period he stared back before maneuvering himself backward into the water. Maybe I should have taken the opportunity to drive my knife into its head, but honestly speaking, I was too stunned from the extent this animal was going through to get me, and I was also frozen in fear.